Hello dear students and welcome to lesson 7, which is building complex sentences in technical writing. By the end of this lesson you will be able to identify complex sentences and their structure, use the subordinating conjunctions of different types to connect ideas logically in order to formulate a complex sentence, and as well you will be able to write complex sentences to express conditions, causes, and time relations in ICT writing. Let's first define what is a complex sentence. A complex sentence is formulated of two clauses. The first one is an independent clause, which is a complete idea by itself. However, the second clause is dependent, which means that it depends on the other clause in order to have a meaning. That is to say, it cannot stand alone. The dependent clauses can add details, reasons, or conditions. For example, the application stopped working because the database crashed. The application stopped working is the independent clause, which has a complete meaning if we put it alone. However, because the database crashed is a dependent clause which depends on the first part to have a meaning. That is to say, the expression because the database crashed doesn't have a meaning alone. It needs an independent clause in order to formulate a complex sentence and have a meaning. Let's dive in the structure of a complex sentence. A complex sentence can start first by an independent clause plus dependent clause. For example, the system restored. This is the independent clause. When the update finished, this is the dependent clause, which doesn't have a meaning alone. Okay? Together they formulate a complex sentence. The system restarted when the update finished. This is a complex sentence. We can start our complex sentence by the dependent clause, but the punctuation will be different. For example, although the code was long, this is a dependent clause. Here we need to put a comma or a period, then adding an independent clause. It executed perfectly. Although the code was long, comma, it executed perfectly. This is a complex sentence. So what's the difference between them? The difference is when we start our complex sentence by the dependent clause, which is always starting by a subordinating conjunction, we need to put a comma. However, if our complex sentence is starting by an independent clause, which is the case in pattern 1, we don't have to put a comma. Okay, we start our sentence by a capital letter and finish it by a full stop. Here let's explore the function of common subordinating conjunctions that can be used in order to formulate a complex sentence. We have first conjunctions of reason or cause, like because, since, as. The server crashed because the memory was full. The server crashed is an independent clause. Because the memory was full, this is a dependent clause. We have other conjunctions of time, like when, after, before, while, until. We use them to know the difference between the time. We compare the time when actions happened. For example, users cannot, sorry, for example, the system reboots after an update. Here we understand that the reboot action happens after the update action. The system reboots is the independent clause. After an update is a dependent clause. Okay? Together they formulate a complex sentence. We have other conjunctions of reasons like if, unless. For example, users cannot access files unless they have permission. Or we can start differently our sentence by the dependent clause saying, unless they have permission, we need to put a comma and then we carry on. Users cannot access files unless they have permission, or unless users have permission, comma, they cannot access files. Okay? We have conjunctions as well for contrast, that is to say, they show that we have two contrast or opposite ideas related together to formulate a complex sentence. For example, although, even though, whereas. Although the software is powerful, comma, it consumes more space. Here we have started our complex sentence by the dependent clause. Okay, and we have finally conjunctions expressing result or purpose like so that or in order that. Data is encrypted so that it remains secure. We can start differently our sentence by saying so that data remains secure, comma, it is encrypted. So dear students, be careful to punctuation and remember the dependent clause includes as well the conjunction. So the conjunction plus the remaining part together are called the dependent clause, and what makes it dependent is the subordinating conjunction because it made it doesn't have a meaning alone. Let's take some other examples. The application runs faster because it uses cloud computing. Here we have used the conjunction to express reason. We have started our sentence by the independent clause, so we don't have a comma in the middle of the sentence. However, like in the second example, we are starting by the dependent clause. When the system detects an error, comma, it sends an alert. So you can read the other examples. And here we have the common mistakes that you may fall into. The first mistake is writing a clause or a dependent clause alone which doesn't have a meaning. You need to complete your complex sentence. The system crashed because the server overheated. Okay? You may as well fall into the mistake of wrong punctuation. Be careful. If you start your sentence with the dependent clause that always starts by a subordinating conjunction, you need to put a comma after it and then you put the independent clause, then a full stop. Okay? There is no full stop in the middle of the sentence. And finally, the use of correct tenses is very important in language writing. Don't forget, these students, to practice the activities in order to understand the lesson. Let's summarize our lesson in this lesson, we have seen that a complex sentence joins two clauses. One is independent and the other one is dependent and starts with a subordinating conjunction that can be used to express cause, time, or condition. Place a comma if you start your complex sentence by a dependent clause, and remember that complex sentences make ICT writing more coherent, precise, and advanced. All your questions are welcome in the comments, and thank you for your attention. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. See you on the next lesson, dear students.